Hey guys, Chef Hawks here again, and so today I'm talking about thickeners. We have so many different types of thickeners available to us, things like agar-agar, gelatin, gum arabic, pectin, but today I want to focus more on the types of thickeners we use for sauces and soups rather than ones that we use for pastries and puddings. So this means I'm going to be talking about the four main thickeners that we use in the kitchen every day. So these are Roux, beurre manier, slurries, and a liaison. We're starting off with our Roux. The Roux is the most stable of our generally used thickeners. It can be cooked to a white stage, as we're doing today, but then it can also be cooked a little farther to take it to a blonde, a brown, or even a dark brown stage. Today, as we're making the white roux to make a bechamel, we're only going to cook that roux for just a few minutes. If we wanted it to be a blonde, a brown, or a dark brown roux, we would cook it even farther. When we would take it to the stage of a very dark brown roux, maybe for a gumbo, then we would want to use a high smoke point oil instead of the butter we're using today, so that we don't burn the butter and have it where the flavor would be bitter and unpleasant. As you can see, we've blended together now our flour and our butter, and we're allowing that to cook just to allow the starch to start to bloom from the flour. It's going to gelatinize. This will give us the ability to now start mixing in the liquid, the milk in this case, slowly but surely, and we're going to be able to make a sauce that's not lumpy. At this point, it is vital that we always take note of the fact that if you're going to have a hot roux, you must add a cold liquid to go with it, or if it's going to be a cold roux, you would add a hot liquid to it. If you try to add a hot roux to a hot liquid or a cold roux to a cold liquid, it will guaranteed to go lumpy. As long as you use the opposing temperatures, and as long as you mix it in thoroughly and you just incrementally add in the liquid, you will make a wonderful smooth sauce. At this stage, with all the milk added in, we now just need to maintain the heat fairly high to make sure that it will come to a boil and keep it stirring. This is the danger of using a flour sauce, is that it can burn on the bottom, it can scorch if you don't keep it stirring. But now is when all of the starch that's in that flour is going to bloom to make a wonderful coating sauce. Next up, we're going to look at a beurre manier. A beurre manier is like a brother or sister to the roux. We're using the same recipe where we're taking the same flour and fat and mixing them together. The only difference here is we're not going to cook the roux. That's why it's called a beurre manier. So why would we want to choose this method instead? This is a great way not only just to thicken a sauce in general, but also to be able to add a little extra thickness at the end if we slightly misjudged exactly how thick we want our sauce to be. If you've mixed everything together and you already made a roux, and as you're adding the last of that liquid in, you're just knowing you're not going to thicken it up quite enough, now we can use a little beurre manier and you can control that last thickness added in there. Whilst we don't have any control over the colour because we're not cooking the roux, with a beurre manier we do still have great stability that starch from wheat flour offers to us as a thickener. With our milk just coming up to a boil now, we're about ready to be able to use our beurre manier. we'll need a whisk in this case, because we'll need to be able to mix this in rapidly. So we're going to take some of our beurre manier and we're going to break it up into small pea-sized pieces, dropping it in and whisking it in rapidly. This gives us just enough time that as the starches start to gelatinize, just whilst that butter is melting, it gives us enough time for it to all mix in and to make a nice smooth sauce. In the same way that we deal with the roux, we're also going to want to cook out the starch in a beurre manier to ensure that we don't have that grainy, floury kind of flavor, because we want our sauce to taste of that nice, rich, creamy flavor, in this case as a bechamel. Now we're moving on to our pure starch thickening agents. In this case, we're going to use cornstarch, but a very similar product is that we can use arrowroot. There is definitely a right way and definitely a wrong way that we can use these pure starches. This is the wrong way. Taking the starch directly in powder form with a boiling liquid, in this case our milk, and we just dump it straight into the milk and try and whisk as fast as we possibly can to avoid those lumps. Let's take a look and see how it turns out. Arrowroot and cornstarch have the ability to absorb vast amounts of liquid and thicken them. However, they do it almost instantly as soon as they hit that boiling liquid. As we can see in this example, as soon as that powder hits that, you cannot whisk it fast enough in order to be able to make a smooth sauce. Take 2. So how do we do this? So we're going to take some of our cornstarch and we're going to add a little of the cold milk into there. Just a few tablespoons, just enough that we can dissolve the cornstarch down and make it into what we call a slurry. A slurry should be no thicker than some cream, so that way it's maneuverable enough that as we pour it into our boiling liquid, our milk in this case, and we whisk it, it will literally buy us just enough time to break it up, so that way as it hits the boiling liquid, it thickens, but it thickens evenly, giving us a nice smooth sauce. Making a cornstarch or arrowroot slurry gives a great opportunity if you have a customer who has gluten intolerances and we can't use wheat flour in that place. However, be aware that it does make a more translucent and very white colored sauce. This doesn't give that nice creamy rich look or appeal to a sauce, so sometimes we have to make adjustments to allow for this. Notice just how quickly this milk thickens as soon as that cornstarch hits into there and mixes in. You must whisk rapidly to make sure that this is a nice smooth sauce. Whilst the cornstarch is a very powerful thickener, be aware it should only be used at the end of the cooking process for whatever it's added into. Overmixing can actually break down the starch complex and eventually bringing it back down to a watery consistency. Our last thickening agent is a very different one indeed. It requires a lot more care and precision when using it, but it does yield an exceptionally rich and creamy type of thickening agent. This is another thickening agent which is required to be only used at the end of the cooking process. This is because we're taking egg yolks and cream. If we overcook those egg yolks, you will end up with scrambled eggs, thus probably ruining the entire dish you've been creating. In a similar way to if we're making an egg custard or ice cream, we're going to temper our eggs. We add in some of our hot liquid to the egg and cream mix, and we whip that in to melt them in properly together to slowly temper those eggs to prepare them for the heat that they're going to receive back into the sauce. Once they're added back into the sauce, we need to whisk them in evenly, and we need to control that heat to ensure it doesn't get too high. Whilst this thickening agent isn't the strongest and isn't the most stable, it is the richest of all of them, adding wonderful colour and flavour and richness to that sauce. How can we tell when the eggs have had their thickening effect? Just take a look at the back of the spoon. We should have a nice napping effect with a good coating to the back of the spoon.